Welcome to this explainer. I am so glad you're here. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We're going to piece together this massive puzzle of religious rhetoric and debate methodology. Specifically, we're taking a completely neutral look at an apologetic presentation given by Vocab Malone over in London. We're going to deconstruct exactly how he builds this really complex theological argument comparing Christianity and Islam, using ancient texts as his main tool. Now, just to be super clear up front, we are not here to take sides on the theology itself. No way. Instead, we're looking at the analogy of the argument. It's essentially a masterclass in how ideas are structured, contested, and defended. So let's get right into it.
Malone actually kicks off his presentation with this brilliant little icebreaker. He just asks the crowd, hey, what is your favorite movie quote? And you know how it goes. People instantly start shouting out the classics, right? I am your father, I'll be back, you can't handle the truth. It's fun, it wakes the room up, but it actually serves a highly strategic purpose. He takes that shared cultural touchstone and pivots straight into the concept of ancient text, basically asking, look, if we all know these movie lines today, what were the lines stuck in the cultural consciousness of the ancient world? Now, you might think the most cited verse in the New Testament is going to be something universally known, like loving your neighbor or something like that. But actually, it's Psalm 110. Get this, it is cited roughly 23 times across 11 different New Testament books by 7 of the 9 authors. To put that into perspective, that sheer frequency is exactly why Malone playfully calls it the Bible's favorite Bible verse. It was literally the ultimate ancient quote.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for today. 1. Finding common ground. 2. The core text. 3. The Matthew 22 strategy. 4. Addressing objections. And finally, 5. The cumulative case.
Section 1. Finding common ground. The premise. So any skilled debater knows you have to start exactly where your opponent is. You literally cannot argue successfully unless you first establish an agreed-upon foundation. To do this with a predominantly Muslim audience, Maloney deliberately brings up Islamic texts. Specifically, he points to the Qur'an, Surah 17 and Surah 21, which explicitly say, "And to David we gave the book of Psalms." He highlights that the Qur'an speaks really positively of David, noting that Allah gave him prophethood and the Psalms. By establishing this shared reverence, Maloney builds a bridge. He's essentially saying, hey, we both agree this text has weight, right?
And that brings us to a really fascinating rhetorical technique, presuppositional apologetics. This is basically the engine driving Malone's entire presentation. It's a strategy where you step inside the opposing worldview, you adopt their assumptions, and then you use their own internal logic to expose what you believe are contradictions. So Malone is setting up a collision here. He takes the Islamic worldview's affirmation of the Psalms and smashes it directly into the actual, specific words found within Psalm 110.
Section 2. The core text. Psalm 110, verse 1.
Using the Legacy Standard Bible translation, Malone reads the text. Yahweh says to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I put your enemies as a footstool for your feet." Now, he drops some fascinating historical context here. In the ancient Near East, making your enemies a footstool wasn't just some poetic metaphor. Nope. Egyptian and Assyrian kings literally had footstools crafted with the faces of their captured enemies on them, or they would quite literally rest their feet on the necks of defeated rulers to show total dominance. It's a text vibrating with ancient, visceral themes of absolute power.
Section 3. The Matthew 22 strategy. The trap. Malone then breaks down Jesus' approach in the Gospel of Matthew, and it reads like a strategic trap. Step 1. Jesus asks the Pharisees whose son the Messiah is. They say, David's son. Okay, they agree on that. Step 2. Jesus immediately quotes Psalm 110, pointing out that David, speaking under inspiration, calls the Messiah his Lord. And then, boom, step 3. The trap closes. Jesus asks, well, if David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? The absolute brilliance here is that Jesus uses a question they already agree on to set up this inescapable logical conundrum. Malone points out that Jesus' opponents were silenced because they fully understood the force of this exact argument. And the realization of what Jesus was doing here is absolutely huge. During the era of Second Temple Judaism, rabbis and scholars already widely interpreted Psalm 110 as a messianic prophecy. Jesus was leveraging an interpretation they already held. Because his opponents agreed this text was about the coming king, the paradox Jesus presented, that an ancient ancestor would call his own descendant Lord, was totally inescapable. They couldn't just brush it off as a poem about a regular guy. He used their own interpretation against them, a real game changer.
Section 4. Addressing objections. specifically the linguistic debates.
Of course, Malone anticipates the pushback. Opponents of this Christian interpretation, both Jewish apologists and Muslim debaters, typically respond by putting the original Hebrew grammar under a microscope. He neutrally lays out their primary linguistic objection. In the original Hebrew, there's a distinction in the words used for Lord. The text uses Yahweh for God, but when David says, "to my Lord," the Hebrew word is Adoni, which is typically used for human rulers or masters. The critics argue, hey, if David meant God, he would have used Adonai, which is exclusively used for the divine. Therefore, it's just a translation misunderstanding, and David is just talking about a human king.
But hold on a second. Malone offers a really sharp rebuttal to this. He argues that getting bogged down in this grammatical debate completely misses the cultural shock of the passage. Think about it. In the ancient Middle East, fathers outrank sons, and ancestors heavily outrank descendants. The shock isn't the spelling of the word. The shock is that the great King David would submit to a descendant at all. Plus, he points out that in the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, the exact same Greek word, kurios, is used for both instances of Lord. So the ancient Greek-speaking world definitely understood the profound elevation happening in the text. Next, Malone systematically dismantles another common alternative objection from his Muslim audience, the idea that the text of the Psalms was simply corrupted over time. He poses a really tricky logical dilemma here. Was the text corrupted before Muhammad? Well, if so, why does the Qur'an command Jews and Christians to uphold their scriptures as reliable? Okay, actually, scratch that. Maybe it was corrupted after Muhammad. But that contradicts hard historical evidence, because we have ancient manuscript copies of Psalm 110 dating centuries before Islam even existed. So according to Malone, the corruption claim just kind of collapses under its own weight.
Section 5. The cumulative case. The sum of the parts.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Malone asks his audience to look at the whole shebang, the full package of attributes given to this figure in Psalm 110. Really strong arguments are rarely built on just one translated word, right? They rely on the sheer weight of all these combined attributes. This person isn't just addressed as David's Lord. He is literally enthroned beside Yahweh, sharing in divine rule. He exercises universal judgment over the nations. And uniquely, he's declared a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Malone argues there is no way an ordinary human king fits this incredibly high divine package of attributes.
Let's trace that obscure name really quick, Melchizedek. Malone maps out how this creates a brilliant narrative thread stretching across thousands of years of text. It's literally like a giant puzzle. Back in Genesis 14, this mysterious priest king Melchizedek meets Abram. Hundreds of years later, Psalm 110 prophesies that the ultimate Messiah will be an eternal priest in this exact non-Levitical order. And finally, centuries after that, the New Testament book of Hebrews argues that Jesus perfectly fulfills this permanent priesthood. It's an awe-inspiring, cross-millennial textual argument saying the Messiah is both eternal king and priest.
To wrap up his textual argument, Malone shows how early Christians profoundly expanded that initial ancient Near Eastern metaphor. Remember the footstool imagery? While ancient kings put their literal feet on the literal necks of captured soldiers, the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. God puts all things under the Messiah's feet. But the ultimate enemy isn't some earthly military force like Babylon or Rome. The ultimate enemy is cosmic. It is literally death itself. As we've seen through Vocab Malone's presentation, ancient words are definitely not just dead history. So it leaves us with a pretty big question. How do ancient shared texts continue to shape the architecture of modern theological debate, whether it's a debate happening in the 1st century or one happening today in London between Christians and Muslims? The interpretation of these shared, ancient foundations continues to fuel passionate, deeply structured discussions about the nature of the divine. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you next time.